Tipu Sultan. We're talking about a historical figure who has been dead for over 200 years, yet somehow his name is absolutely dominating headlines, sparking fierce debates, and causing massive political uproar today. So we're going to unpack the actual history, the myths, and the modern-day controversy surrounding the man they call the Tiger of Mysore.
So picture this. We're starting in modern-day Mumbai. Back in 2022, there was a renovation of a local sports ground called Tipu Sultan Gardens, and it sparked these fierce, massive protests. Right-wing organizations literally took to the streets, demanding the name be changed, actively protesting the inauguration of the grounds. It really begs the question, why is an 18th century anti-colonial king causing such intense political friction today?
This completely captures the massive divide we're seeing right now. On one hand, for over 2 centuries, Tipu Sultan has been widely celebrated by the state and so many citizens as an anti-colonial hero, a freedom fighter, a visionary ruler who bravely stood up to the British. But today, the Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP, along with various right-wing groups, are promoting a completely different counter-narrative. They're portraying him as a brutal king and a terrorist who actively persecuted Hindus. To understand how one single man can be viewed through 2 radically different lenses, we really have to look at the facts of his life.
Part 1, Rise of the Tiger. To really grasp why this matters right now, we need to flash back to 1750 and look at the actual history of his rise to power in the Kingdom of Mysore.
Tipu Sultan was born into a serious military family. His father, Hyder Ali, was a highly decorated military officer who eventually rose up to become the Sultan of Mysore. But Tipu didn't just sit back and enjoy a cushy royal upbringing. Imagine being just 15 years old. Most of us are, just navigating high school. But at 15, Tipu accompanied his father to battle in Malabar. And he wasn't just sitting on the sidelines observing. He actually took command of over 2,000 men.
The guy was honestly a military prodigy. But he wasn't just about brute force, he was also this incredibly skilled diplomat. By the age of 17, while his dad was busy trying to win over the Marathas, young Tipu successfully negotiated with the Nizam of Hyderabad. He was stepping into this massive power struggle to defend his kingdom against an aggressive, super well-funded British East India Company that was just desperate to gain control over southern India. And then in 1782, following his father's death, he officially became the Sultan.
Part 2, the Anglo-Mysore Wars. Tipu Sultan's reputation as a warrior king was truly forged in blood.
His animosity toward the British was deep-rooted, especially after they reneged on a crucial mutual defense pact back in 1769 when the Marathas attacked Mysore. After that, Tipu became a constant thorn in their side. In total, he fought 4 grueling wars against the British Empire, and incredibly, he actually won 3 of them. What you really need to understand here is the sheer scale of his victories. During the Second Anglo-Mysore War in 1780, Tipu Sultan led a force of 10,000 men. In a stunning victory, his forces captured 4,000 British troops as prisoners and killed 336 men.
I mean, this wasn't just some minor skirmish. This was literally the absolute worst military defeat the British East India Company had ever suffered in India up to that point. It was a complete, crushing blow that completely humiliated the British forces and ultimately forced them into a peace treaty in 1784. Tipu Sultan had somehow secured the upper hand against the most powerful empire in the world.
Part 3, Rockets, Revenue, and Reforms. But here's where the story gets even more fascinating. He wasn't just a brilliant general, he was a relentless innovator. His achievements were just incredibly diverse. Get this, in warfare, he was a student of science and math, and he actually pioneered the use of iron-cased rocket artillery. We're not talking about firecrackers here. These iron tubes could fire missiles up to 2 kilometers away. It absolutely terrified British forces who had never faced anything like that technology. Domestically, he introduced a new calendar, implemented a completely new land revenue system, and intentionally fostered the growth of the now famous Mysore silk industry. He was essentially building a modern, self-sustaining state. Because of all this immense power and innovation, the British were absolutely terrified of him. And honestly, what do you do when you're terrified of an enemy you can't beat? You launch a massive propaganda campaign. The British deliberately villainized him in their literature and their art, portraying him as this cruel Muslim fanatic. However, that really contrasts sharply with the historical records of his actual governance. While Tipu was for sure a devout Muslim, historical records show he was actually known during his reign for his tolerance of Hinduism, which was the faith of the vast majority of his subjects.
Part 4, the fall of Mysore. Now, empires rarely just give up, right? So let's jump to 1789 and see how the British finally orchestrated his downfall. The systematic decline of his kingdom was just tragic. The British bided their time, accumulated immense resources, and by 1793, they had completely besieged his capital and essentially stolen half of Mysore's territory. To ensure his compliance, they did the unthinkable. They took Tipu's 2 young boys, aged just 7 and 11, as hostages until a massive ransom was paid. Tipu spent years just trying to rebuild what was left. By 1799, knowing he was totally outnumbered, he repeatedly wrote to the British asking for a peace treaty, but the British refused. They wanted total control. At this point, the only thing standing between the British East India Company and total dominion over India was his capital city. In 1799, the British marched upon Mysore with an overwhelming, almost insurmountable force of 50,000 men.
Tipu's forces held them back for as long as humanly possible, but on May 4, 1799, the walls were breached. And rather than surrender, Tipu literally rushed right into the breach and was killed in battle. He was just 48 years old. His threat to the empire was so deeply felt that his death was actually celebrated all over Britain. In the aftermath, his family was exiled into poverty, and his beloved Mysore was absorbed as a princely state under British rule.
Part 5. Rewriting historical memory. All right, let's swing the pendulum of history all the way back to the present day and see how this all connects.
What is truly fascinating about this modern debate is the stark political reversal we're seeing. Records show that as recently as 2012, BJP leaders were actually out there praising Tipu Sultan. Their then chief minister praised him as a freedom fighter. Leaders were photographed wearing Tipu Sultan turbans, and they even visited his monuments. Yet, jump forward to 2015 in the present day, and the narrative has completely flipped. When the Congress government tried to celebrate his birth anniversary, BJP leaders branded the celebration as anti-Hindu and began protesting him as a tyrant.
This shift in perspective is having real-world impacts, especially in education. Back in 2020, the Karnataka government actually attempted to remove Tipu Sultan and his father completely from social science textbooks. While that decision got temporarily put on hold, it is part of a wider, ongoing project associated with the rise of Hindu nationalism to erase Mughal-era history from textbooks and replace it with Hindu leaders. Now, critics strongly argue that this sudden villainization isn't about historical accuracy at all, but is a calculated political move designed to divide voters along communal lines. Supporters of the revisions, on the other hand, claim they are simply correcting a historically biased narrative.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to chew on. The story of the Tiger of Mysore really shows us that history isn't just some dusty, static record of the past. It is an incredibly powerful, living tool that's being actively rewritten and contested right now, today. When we look at Tipu Sultan, are we seeing the 18th century ruler, or are we just looking at a reflection of modern 21st century political divides? How far will political movements go to reshape history, and ultimately, how will those changing narratives impact how future generations understand the very foundation of their own country? Thank you so much for exploring this wild topic with me.